The moment Olivia Grant pushed open the apartment door, she nearly gagged. The air was thick with the scent of old takeout, and dirty dishes were scattered across every available surface. Clothes, mostly expensive-looking button-ups and slacks, were draped over the furniture like abandoned ghosts. She had seen messy apartments before, but this was something else. With a sigh, she tightened her ponytail and adjusted her cleaning gloves. "All right, mystery client, let's see what disaster you've left me this time." Olivia had been working as a cleaner for nearly 3 years, taking on private clients to pay off her student loans. Most of them were busy professionals who barely had time to breathe, let alone scrub a bathroom. This particular client, however, was new. His name on the request form was simply J. Everett, and he had paid double in advance with one simple instruction: just clean, no need to meet. She didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it that way. As she got to work, she couldn't help but notice the details. The furniture wasn't just expensive, it was the kind you only saw in luxury magazines. The countertops were marble, the appliances top of the line. Even the mess had a sort of careless wealth to it. The kind of mess made by someone who didn't worry about consequences. By the time she reached the bedroom, she was convinced this guy was either a workaholic lawyer or some kind of tech genius. There was a neatly folded tuxedo on the bed, as if discarded after a gala, and a watch and Audemars Piguet casually tossed on the nightstand. Olivia had no idea how much it cost, but it had to be worth more than her entire bank account. With a low whistle, she shook her head. Must be nice. Little did she know the man who lived here was watching her. Across the city, Jackson Everett sat in his sleek, glass-walled office, staring at the security feed on his laptop. He wasn't supposed to be doing this. He had hired a cleaning service for a reason: to keep his life in order without interruptions. But when he saw the notification that someone was in his penthouse, curiosity got the best of him. And now he was fascinated. The woman cleaning his apartment wasn't what he expected. Most of the cleaners sent by the service were older, efficient, and indifferent. But she had a sharp focus, a quiet determination in the way she scrubbed his kitchen as if she was battling an enemy. She even muttered to herself when she found something particularly gross, which made him chuckle. Jackson wasn't used to people talking freely in his space. Most who entered his world either wanted something from him or were too intimidated to act natural. But this woman, she had no idea who he was, and for the first time in a long time that felt refreshing. He leaned back in his chair, watching as she wiped down the bookshelves. That was when she noticed the framed photo. Jackson tensed. She picked it up, tilting her head. It was a picture of his parents, the only personal item he kept in plain view. Most people who entered his penthouse never noticed it, but she did. Jackson shut the laptop, suddenly feeling exposed. He had no idea why he cared what this stranger thought of him. But something about Olivia Grant intrigued him, and he wasn't about to let her disappear. Olivia stood back and surveyed her work. The penthouse, once a chaotic mess of discarded luxury, now gleamed under the soft overhead lights. The air smelled fresh, a mix of citrus cleaner and something subtly expensive that lingered in the furniture. Satisfied, she peeled off her gloves and packed up her supplies. She glanced at the clock. Another long day, but at least this job paid well. With a final look at the pristine space, she grabbed her bag and locked up behind her. Meanwhile, across town, Jackson Everett leaned against the sleek bar in an upscale lounge, swirling a glass of whiskey while his mind remained elsewhere. The usual scene unfolded around him: businessmen discussing deals, women eyeing him with calculated interest, but he found himself distracted. By her, Olivia Grant. He had looked her up. Not in a creepy way, he told himself, just curiosity. She was 27, worked 2 jobs, and had no social media beyond a barely used profile for her cleaning service. Her life was a stark contrast to his: a world away from wealth and privilege, yet there was something about her that felt more real than anything he had encountered in years. "You're unusually quiet," a voice interrupted his thoughts. Jackson looked up to find his longtime friend and business partner, Ethan Caldwell, watching him with amusement. Ethan was dressed in a tailored suit, his expression knowing. They had built their empire together, turning a small tech startup into a multi-million-dollar powerhouse. They had seen everything: money, power, betrayal, and yet Jackson had never been this distracted by something, or rather someone so ordinary. "I was thinking," Jackson admitted. "That's dangerous," Ethan teased before taking a sip of his drink. "What's on your mind?" Jackson hesitated, then decided against mentioning Olivia. The last thing he needed was Ethan digging into it. Nothing important. Ethan raised an eyebrow but let it go. "Well, whatever it is, figure it out before the gala next weekend. Investors will be watching." Jackson nodded absently, but his mind was already elsewhere. The next morning, Olivia arrived at her next job, only to find an unexpected request waiting in her inbox. J. Everett has requested you personally for ongoing cleaning services. Weekly, same rate. She frowned at the message, rereading it twice. Most clients didn't care who cleaned as long as the job got done, but this one wanted her, specifically. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Still, she needed the money, and so she accepted. For the next few weeks, Olivia found herself slipping into a new routine. Every Friday, she arrived at the penthouse, cleaned, and left. The place was always a disaster when she got there, as if Jackson Everett lived in a whirlwind of chaos. Papers scattered across the desk, half-drunk glasses of whiskey abandoned on tables, expensive clothes draped carelessly over furniture. Yet there were small things she noticed. A book left open to a specific page, a forgotten coffee cup with just enough left to suggest late nights. The faint scent of cologne that clung to the air, something rich and masculine. And then, one evening, everything changed. Olivia had just finished scrubbing the kitchen when the door opened behind her. She froze. She was never supposed to see him. That was the unspoken rule of her job: clean, leave, no interaction. But now, standing in the doorway, was a man who looked nothing like the faceless, overworked executive she had imagined. Jackson Everett was tall, his presence commanding. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he had run his fingers through it one too many times. He wore a sharp, tailored dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. His gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he crossed the room, moving with the kind of confidence that came from knowing the world bent to his will. Olivia, however, didn't back down. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, gripping the counter. Jackson tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Neither are you technically. It's after your usual hours." "I had extra work," she replied. "Didn't think you'd be home." He leaned against the island, watching her. "I wanted to meet you." Her stomach flipped at the quiet statement. She straightened, trying to ignore the way his gaze lingered on her. "Most clients don't care who cleans as long as it gets done." "I'm not most clients." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. She exhaled. "Well, now you've met me." "If you'll excuse me, I need to finish packing up." He didn't move. "You don't ask questions," she frowned. "Should I?" "Most people would." "I'm not most people," she shot back. A slow, almost imperceptible shift happened in his expression. Amusement, interest. For a man who had everything, Olivia got the sense he wasn't used to people treating him like just another person. "Why do you do this?" he asked. She blinked. "Clean," he nodded. She shrugged. "It pays the bills." He studied her for a moment before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a sleek black card. He slid it across the counter toward her. She glanced at it but didn't pick it up. "What's this?" "A way out," he said simply. "If you ever want something more." She narrowed her eyes. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," she scoffed. "Then what is it?" His gaze didn't waver. "A door, you choose whether or not to walk through it." She hesitated, then pushed the card back toward him. "I'm good where I am." For the first time, Jackson looked surprised. People didn't turn down his offers, ever. But Olivia Grant wasn't like anyone he had met before, and that only made him want to know her more. Jackson Everett had spent years perfecting the art of control. In business, in negotiations, in the way people perceived him. But Olivia Grant had thrown that balance off without even trying. After their last encounter, he had expected her to at least consider his offer. Most people in her position would have. But she had simply walked away, leaving him standing in his own penthouse, staring at the untouched black card on the counter. For the first time in a long time, someone had told him no, and he couldn't stop thinking about her. The following Friday, Olivia arrived at the penthouse later than usual. A last-minute request from another client had delayed her, and by the time she stepped inside, exhaustion weighed on her. The place was, as always, in disarray, but something was different this time. Jackson was home. He was seated on the couch, one arm draped over the backrest, watching her with quiet amusement. A glass of whiskey rested on the table beside him, half finished. He looked relaxed, but there was a sharpness in his gaze, like a man accustomed to knowing everything before anyone else even realized they were playing a game. Olivia hesitated for only a moment before dropping her bag by the door. "You're in my way," she said, eyeing the mess around him. He gestured toward the room. "Be my guest," she sighed, moving past him toward the kitchen. She had cleaned around people before, but there was something about Jackson's presence that made the space feel smaller, more charged. The silence stretched between them, neither speaking as she worked. But she could feel his gaze following her, lingering when she reached for a rag, when she wiped down the counter, when she bent to pick up an empty bottle near the couch. Finally, she broke the silence. "You don't seem like the kind of man who lets things get this messy." Jackson exhaled a quiet laugh. "What kind of man do I seem like?" She considered that for a moment before answering. "The kind who has everything in order." "Except maybe yourself." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You like things a certain way," she continued, "but you don't actually take care of them yourself." He studied her, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And you?" "You take care of everything yourself." Olivia straightened, tossing a used cloth into her cleaning bag. "Someone has to." A beat of silence passed before Jackson spoke again. "You don't let people help you." She met his gaze. "No," he nodded, as if he understood something unspoken. The air between them shifted, heavier now, charged with something neither of them acknowledged. Olivia turned back to her work, ignoring the way her pulse had quickened. She had dealt with difficult clients before, but Jackson wasn't difficult, he was something else entirely. A puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. By the time she finished, Jackson hadn't moved. She slung her bag over her shoulder and paused in the doorway. "You could make this easier on yourself, you know." He looked up at her. She gestured toward the penthouse. "Hire a live-in housekeeper. Someone to deal with this mess before it gets out of control." Jackson stood, crossing the room in steady, measured steps until he was only a foot away. "And miss our weekly meetings." Her breath caught for half a second before she forced herself to roll her eyes. "You're impossible." His mouth twitched, but he said nothing as she turned and left. But as the door clicked shut behind her, Jackson knew one thing for certain. He wasn't letting her go. The next time Olivia arrived at the penthouse, she felt the shift before she even stepped inside. Something had changed. The place wasn't in complete disarray. There were still signs of Jackson's usual chaos, a jacket draped over the back of a chair, a forgotten coffee cup on the counter, but it wasn't the disaster she had come to expect. More than that, she could feel it in the air. A tension, a weight, something unspoken hanging between them. Jackson was waiting for her. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city. The skyline stretched before him, glittering with the lights of a world that had always been his. But tonight he wasn't looking at it. He was waiting for her. She set her bag down slowly, watching him. "You cleaned." He turned, eyes locking onto hers. A little. It wasn't like him, not at all. Olivia folded her arms. "Why?" A slow exhale. "Then I wanted to see if you'd still come if there was less to do." Her stomach tightened. He wasn't talking about the cleaning anymore. She forced a small laugh, trying to keep things light. "So what, you're testing me now?" Jackson stepped closer, closing the space between them. "No," he said quietly, "just trying to understand you." She swallowed. His presence was always overwhelming, but tonight, there was something different in the way he looked at her. Like he was seeing something he hadn't allowed himself to before. She needed to break the moment before it swallowed her whole. Turning away, she grabbed a cloth and started wiping down the counter. "Well, congratulations, I'm still here." He didn't move. "Why?" She froze for half a second before forcing herself to keep cleaning. Because it's my job. That's not why. She pressed her lips together. He was too perceptive, too good at peeling back layers she didn't want to expose. Jackson leaned against the counter, watching her hands move. You never asked me why I requested you personally. She didn't look at him. I figured it didn't matter. It does. Silence stretched between them. Then, softly, he said, You're the only person who doesn't look at me like I'm something to gain. Her breath caught, fingers tightening around the cloth. I've spent my life surrounded by people who only see what I can give them, Jackson continued. Business partners, acquaintances, even people I thought were friends, but you don't care who I am. She finally looked at him, and the intensity in his gaze sent a shiver through her. You don't want anything from me, he said, and I don't know what to do with that. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She could pretend it wasn't happening, pretend she didn't feel the pull between them. But it was there, undeniable, growing stronger every time they stood in the same room. Still, she couldn't let herself fall into something that didn't make sense. Olivia turned away, focusing on the sink. This isn't a good idea. Jackson's voice was quiet but firm. Why not? She squeezed her eyes shut. Because men like you don't fall for women like me. A beat of silence. Then, you really believe that? She let out a slow breath before turning to face him. I think you live in a world I don't belong to. Jackson studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out, a key. He set it on the counter between them. Olivia frowned. What is that? His voice was even steady. A choice. She stared at him. You don't think you belong in my world, he said. Fine. Then let me into yours. Her chest tightened. Jackson, no expectations, he interrupted. No strings, just let me be wherever you are. It was reckless, dangerous. But as she stood there, staring at the key, she realized something terrifying. She wanted to take it. She wanted to let him in. And for the first time in her life, Olivia Grant didn't know what she was more afraid of falling or the fact that she already had. Olivia stared at the key on the counter, her pulse thrumming in her ears. It was too much, too fast. She wasn't the kind of woman who got caught up in reckless decisions, least of all with a man like Jackson Everett. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to lift her gaze to his. He was watching her, waiting, not pressing, not demanding, just offering. Something about that made it even harder to breathe. She shook her head. This isn't how things work. Jackson didn't flinch. How do things work then? She opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't have an answer, not one she could say out loud. Because the truth was, she didn't know anymore. She grabbed her bag, ignoring the way her fingers trembled. I need to think. He nodded once, stepping back. Take your time. She left without another word, but the weight of his offer followed her all the way home. Days passed, but Olivia couldn't shake the memory of that key, of the way Jackson had looked at her like she was something worth waiting for. She tried to distract herself, burying herself in work, picking up extra cleaning jobs, anything to keep her mind from wandering back to him. But it was useless, because no matter where she went, he was there. Not physically, but in the spaces between her thoughts, in the moments where she caught herself staring at the city skyline, wondering what he was doing. And then, one evening, she made a decision. She found herself standing outside a restaurant she never would have stepped into on her own. The kind with a name written in understated gold lettering, where the waitstaff wore crisp white jackets and spoke in hushed tones. She had spent the better part of an hour debating whether or not to come, but now that she was here, turning back wasn't an option. She stepped inside, scanning the room, and then she saw him. Jackson sat at a table near the back, a glass of wine in front of him, his phone untouched beside it. He wasn't distracted, wasn't caught up in business or a conversation, he was just waiting. For her, their eyes met and something flickered in his expression, not surprise, something softer. She took a steadying breath and walked toward him. He stood as she approached, his gaze never leaving hers. You came, she nodded. I don't know why. His lips quirked at the honesty, but he didn't push. Instead, he pulled out a chair for her. She hesitated for only a second before sitting. A waiter appeared instantly, placing a menu in front of her. She barely glanced at it. Her attention was on Jackson. What is this? She asked quietly. He leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on the table. Dinner. She huffed a quiet laugh. That's not what I meant. I know. He studied her for a moment. You said men like me don't fall for women like you. Her stomach tightened. Jackson's voice was steady. I think you're wrong. The air between them grew heavier, the restaurant noise fading into the background. She swallowed hard. This isn't a fairy tale. No, he agreed. It's real. That was the terrifying part. She had spent so long keeping herself guarded, keeping people at a distance, but Jackson wasn't letting her. He wasn't demanding anything from her, he was just there, waiting for her to decide. She exhaled slowly. I don't know how to do this. His gaze softened. Then let's figure it out together. The words settled deep in her chest, warm and steady. She could walk away. She could pick up her bag, leave this restaurant, and pretend none of this had ever happened, or she could stay. She reached for the menu, her fingers brushing the edge. Okay. Jackson's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, something hopeful. For the first time in a long time, Olivia let herself hope, too. Jackson watched Olivia across the candlelit table, taking in the way her fingers traced the stem of her wine glass. She was nervous, though she tried to hide it behind a carefully neutral expression. But he had studied her long enough to recognize the subtle shifts in her demeanor, the way her shoulders tensed ever so slightly when she wasn't sure what to say. He didn't push. Instead, he let the silence settle, allowing her the space to process whatever thoughts warred in her mind. After a few moments, she exhaled, setting her glass down. I don't understand you. His lips twitched, but he kept his tone even. What about me is so hard to understand? She tilted her head slightly, considering him. You could be anywhere right now with anyone. Yet you're here. He met her gaze without hesitation. Because I want to be. A flicker of something unreadable passed through her expression. I don't get it, she admitted. People like you don't usually go for people like me. Jackson leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You keep saying that. Why? She hesitated, then sighed. Because I've spent my whole life watching men like you choose women who fit into their world, the kind who belong at charity galas and luxury events. I'm not that. He studied her, taking in the quiet vulnerability in her voice. Maybe that's the problem with my world, he said. She blinked. What? It's full of people who only know how to exist within it, people who care more about appearances than substance, he explained. You're not like them. And that's why I want you. Olivia's fingers curled against the tablecloth. That doesn't mean we make sense. Jackson's gaze softened. Maybe not on paper, but I've never cared about things making sense. I care about what feels right. She looked away, as if unsure how to respond. He let the weight of his words linger before adding, You can keep telling yourself this isn't real, but we both know it is. Her breath hitched, and for the first time since they sat down, she didn't argue. Dinner passed in a blur of slow conversation and lingering glances. By the time they left the restaurant, the city had settled into a quieter rhythm, the streets illuminated by soft golden lights. Jackson walked beside her, their steps in sync. When they reached the sidewalk, Olivia hesitated, glancing up at him. I should go home, he nodded. I'll call a car for you, she shook her head. I can take the subway. Jackson frowned. No, she arched a brow. That wasn't a question, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Olivia, I've been taking care of myself for a long time, she interrupted gently. I don't need saving, his jaw tightened. That's not what this is. She studied him for a moment, then softened. I know. A car pulled up beside them, the driver stepping out to open the door. Jackson looked at her, waiting. After a beat, she sighed and slid inside. He followed, closing the door behind him. They didn't speak as the city blurred past the windows. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something neither of them wanted to disturb. When they reached her apartment building, Jackson stepped out first, holding the door open for her. Olivia hesitated before following. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. She crossed her arms, glancing up at her building. This is the part where I say goodnight, he nodded slowly. It is. But neither of them moved. The tension between them crackled, something fragile yet undeniable. Finally, Olivia sighed. You don't give up, do you? Jackson's voice was quiet but firm. Not when it matters. A beat of silence passed before she whispered, This scares me. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. Me too. Her breath hitched, and for the first time she didn't try to run from it. Instead, she reached for him. And when Jackson pulled her in, pressing his lips to hers, the world around them faded. Everything else, the doubts, the fears, the differences, ceased to matter. Because in that moment, nothing had ever felt more right. Months passed, and Olivia found herself in a reality she never could have imagined. Jackson hadn't just broken down her walls, he had shattered them. She had expected him to grow bored, to realize she didn't fit into his world, but instead he pulled her deeper into it. He took her to elegant galas, introduced her to people who spoke in measured tones and wore wealth like armor. And yet, through it all, he never let her feel out of place. He was patient, steady. He made space for her, never forcing her to be anything other than herself. And in return, she let him into her world, too. She took him to the small cafe where she spent Sunday mornings, where the owner always knew her order. She introduced him to the stray cat that lived near her apartment building, the one she secretly fed even though pets weren't allowed. She showed him the parts of herself she had never shared with anyone, and somehow, against all logic, they worked. It wasn't perfect. They argued, they clashed, they struggled to bridge the gap between their worlds, but they always found their way back to each other. And then, one evening, everything changed. They were in Jackson's penthouse, Olivia curled up on the couch while he stood by the fireplace, watching her. She glanced up, catching the way he was looking at her. "What?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crossed the room, stopping in front of her. Then, without preamble, he dropped to one knee, her breath caught. Jackson reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. The air between them stilled. "I know you think our worlds don't make sense together," he said quietly. "But I don't care about that, I care about you." Tears burned at the edges of her vision. "I don't want a life that makes sense on paper," he continued. "I want one that makes sense with you." He opened the box, revealing a ring elegant, timeless, undeniably perfect. Olivia pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Jackson's voice was steady. "Marry me." 1,000 doubts, 1,000 fears threatened to rise, but none of them mattered, because this was real. She exhaled shakily, then whispered, "Yes." Jackson's breath left him in a rush, relief, and something deeper washing over his face. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And for the first time in her life, Olivia let herself believe she was. The wedding was small, intimate. Jackson had offered to throw something extravagant, something worthy of the circles he moved in, but Olivia had refused. Instead, they married in a quiet garden, surrounded by the people who mattered most. And when Jackson kissed her, when he held her close and whispered against her lips that she was everything, Olivia knew she had made the right choice. Because love wasn't about fitting into a world. It was about building one together. And as they danced beneath a canopy of twinkling lights, Olivia realized something. She belonged here, not because she had changed, but because Jackson had never asked her to.